In this video, I'm going to show you how to manage and deploy your reports in Power BI using deployment pipelines. I'm going to show you how to set it up step by step with the demo so you can see why it's important to set up a deployment pipeline in the first place. All of that and more, so without further ado, let's get started. Hi, my name is Fernan and welcome to the Solutions Abroad YouTube channel where we cover tips, tricks, and best practices when working with Power BI. I upload new videos every week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when a new one is out. So not so long ago, I created a video explaining how you can version your reports in Power BI using different repository tools like SharePoint folders or OneDrive versioning that allows you to go back and forth between different versions of your files. And in that video, I got a comment asking if I've ever considered covering deployment pipelines. And deployment pipelines is a concept typically found as part of a software development lifecycle. So picture this scenario. You have a report which contains employee information published in the Power BI service. You developed a new feature on the report. Let's say you now want to test this new feature with your internal colleagues in the Power BI service as well. But the report you've published can also be accessed by your clients. And you don't want to simply just overwrite the version on the Power BI service with the new feature that you have in case there are problems or it's not ready yet. This means that you have to create a separate test workspace, get your colleagues to check it, and then when you're ready, publish that version onto the version in the Power BI service which your clients have access to. Deployment pipelines makes this process a lot easier for you. It creates 3 different stages for you to follow. The development stage is where you will build your content for you and other developers to collaborate onto. Once you're done developing and collaborating onto your reports, you deploy now this version into your test stage. The test stage is where you'll typically want to start testing your reports or your new features to a wider audience. Let's say your QA testers. Once the test versions have been tested and is in an acceptable level, you can now deploy this to the production stage. The production stage, which is the final stage, is where your reports and contents will be available to use for your business users and your wider organization. This 3-stage process allows you to release reports and contents that are reliable and well tested because you've gone through this whole 3-stage process. So this concept is also available in Power BI for you to use in the Power BI service. However, I didn't cover this before because this requires a premium capacity or a premium per user license in order to take advantage of it. However, if you have a trial with Power BI Pro or Power BI Premium, you can give it a try for yourself. So here's an example report that I want to use for this demo. It's an employee Power BI report, and you'll notice here it simply has 3 columns and a table, and it just lists out employees of a fictional business. So in this report, we have a couple of visuals to just sort of list those users out. We have some cards here like counting the number of employees that we have in our table and also the average salary for those employees. So this report I've pre-created to pull its data from a SharePoint source, which is a file that I have in my SharePoint site that we will use for today. So this is the SharePoint site, and it's pulling its data from this file here, employees.csv. Now, if we open it, you will see it's the exact same table that we have in the Power BI report. So as best practice, when you're working on reports that are in development, you don't want to be working with production sets of data. So for example, in here, we might be analyzing the salaries of our employees, but you might not want to expose actual salaries or actual names of our employees in our development reports. So in this case, you'll see that this version of our source file is using test people. So we have, test 1 to 10s and some random salaries. However, as we go through the different stages of the deployment pipeline, I will show you how you can set up some rules so that by the time your report has been tested and been approved to deploy to the later stages, you will eventually use the production sets of data, which will be in that same report, except using the production data. So I will show you how to set it up. So before we start with the deployment pipelines, you need to create it first. And you can do that simply in your Power BI service. So you will see this selection here, deployment pipelines. This is where you'll be able to create a pipeline. It gives you a brief description of what you can do as a deployment pipeline and what it's for. And we'll just create this one. We'll just name it employees. And then from here, it gives us the 3 different stages that we were talking about. So development, tests, and production. And it asks you to assign a workspace to each of these stages. Now, if you don't know, workspaces are simply just a way for you to kind of organize content like reports, dashboards together. But in this case, we want to use workspaces as our sort of stages in our deployment pipeline. So for the purposes of this demo, I've already created a couple of workspaces that we can use. So I have the employees dev and employees test, which these 2 workspaces are empty. The only difference is that these workspaces need to have a premium capacity or a premium per user. So that's why, although if you go here in workspaces, we have other workspaces in our account, we can only select between these 2 workspaces that I've created because they are premium. You can see it with the diamond icon next to it. So you simply select and assign the workspace to the pipeline. So we'll say this one is dev and this one will be tests. And I purposely left out the deploy because I want to show you how to create the workspace, the premium workspace for yourself. So let's create that one. So I'm gonna create a workspace here. We'll name this one simply employees. And then expand advanced. You need to select premium per user or premium per capacity. Either of these will work. You can select, just leave that as default, hit save. And you'll see that creates us a premium workspace the same way that we have set for the other workspaces. So let's go back to our pipeline here that we've created. We'll assign that last one and click assign here. So now you've created and assigned workspaces to your deployment pipeline in the Power BI service. Now that we've set up our pipelines, let's start by publishing this report that we've created in Power BI desktop into our dev environment, which is going to be our dev workspace. So we'll hit publish it to our dev here. Now that it's published to that workspace, let's go back to our deployment pipeline here, and you'll see something has changed a little bit. So you can see that now, instead of this green tick between all of the different stages, you have this now. So it means that there is a discrepancy between these 2 stages or these 2 workspaces. And if you compare, it will show you what's different. So you'll see that now it's saying to this, look, we have now 2 items in our development workspace. We have a data set and the report that's been published to it. So the idea here is that you would work in your development environment or your development workspace the same way that you would normally. So you would collaborate here with your colleagues. So you would maybe make changes to the report, or maybe set up the data sets, or make all your configurations with your internal colleagues to kind of to and fro. Once you're happy with the version of the report that you have from development and you want to move it to the testing environment, you simply select the content that you want to deploy. So in this case, we'll just select both of these, and you simply hit deploy to test. What it will do is it will now create a copy of those 2 contents from the development workspace into the tests workspace without you having to republish it from the Power BI desktop. So now that you can see that deployment has been completed, you have now the green tick, which means the content of both the development and tests are in sync. So they are the same, but now it's between the test and production that is not the same. So you can see that the orange thing is now between the tests and the production. So here in the test workspace, as I mentioned before, is where you will want to test your report to a wider audience. So because it works as a workspace by itself, you can give people access to the test environment for them to test out new features, give their feedback, and maybe make changes of your own. And this stage is meant to test the integrity of your reports and your content before it goes to the wider organization in the production workspace. You'll notice that in the tests stage, you will have an option here called deployment settings. And here you will have an ability to define how your content is being updated specifically in this stage. So here, for example, it's saying that we can set deployment rules for a dataset. So we have this dataset here. So we'll select that. And here you can see you can set rules to your data source. So what does that mean? So the rules essentially allow you to change or replace data sources. So you're pointing to a different version of your data source. So as I said, for development, obviously we're using tests data. So we're using a different set of files, which has just, test numbers or test employees. However, for the test version of your employees report, you might want to be pulling from a different data source that resembles sort of how the report will look like when it's using a production data set. And typically your data sources might come from, let's say, different servers or different databases. So in here, you will have the ability to change or add rules to say, okay, so for the test environment, instead of pulling from the SharePoint, you want to replace it with something else. Maybe you have a different URL where it does contain test data instead of the development data. However, because we're using files in SharePoint, we kind of have to use something similar. We're going to use parameter rules instead, which you can see is not available here because we need to set it up. And the reason for that is because we don't actually want to replace the URL, because all our data will come from the same site. It's just gonna be in a different folder, which we can't control directly with the data source, but we can control it with the parameter rules. So what do I mean by that? So you'll see that here in my SharePoint site, at the moment the report is getting its data from this file in our dev folder. In our test workspace, we want to get this data, the same file, but from a different folder. You see employees.csv, which will look slightly similar from our development version, except that it has some names and some salaries, so it will sort of look like the production set of data. So to set up the parameter rules, we need to go back to the Power BI desktop version of our report first. We'll go to transform data to open up Power Query. So what we want to be able to control and manage is this part, so this navigation step, which defines the folder path of where the data should come from in the SharePoint site. So you can see here the folder path points to dev, but we want to be able to dynamically change this using parameters. So let's create a parameter for now. Create new parameter here. We'll just name this one folder path. And we're gonna say it's a text. This is important because if you set it as and leave it as any, you won't be able to change it in the deployment pipelines. And then for the current value, we want to use the folder path. So I'm just gonna set as 1 for now. But what we want essentially is to copy this URL, go to folder path, and change that current value to that. So now that we've created that parameter, we simply replace now in our navigation to use that parameter instead. So you simply just delete that, that text, and then we'll just reference our parameter here, folder path. So what happens there? So you'll see nothing's changed. So you still have the same output. The difference comes now if we change the value of the folder path. So if we say here, if we change it to production, let's say, if you go back to our employees query, you'll see that now the value or the result changes because that navigation is now pulling from a folder, from our production folder, as opposed to the dev, which we can simply control with the parameter. So you can see in the navigation here, it's not written here manually because we are just pulling that data from the folder path. So simple. So let's put it back as dev for now. We'll hit close and apply to make that change. We'll publish this again in our development workspace. Perfect. So now let's go back to our deployment pipeline here. So we'll just close this. Go back here. So just refreshing it, it will try to compare and it will find that it's not the same anymore, of course, because we've made a change. So we'll just deploy it once more. So we'll just hit deploy here, which will copy that version of our report from the development into the test workspace. Now that that's done, you will notice that if we select now the deployment settings and then we click the datasets, now you have this option, parameter rules, available for you. So when you click add a rule, it will allow you to change the parameter that we've created. So this one, the folder path. And from here, you simply just change this from dev to say, give me the data in my test folder. And the test folder is simply this one. Yeah, don't get too confused. There's only 3 folders. So it's saying for the test workspace, just use the data in this folder. To simply save that, hit close. And I think this is a bug on the deployment pipelines, but for this to work, you will need to deploy it once more from the development to the tests, just to sync them all up. And once you're done, you simply hit the refresh on the datasets in the test workspace. Just give it a few seconds. Now that's done, if we go to the employees report now, so now you'll see that this report now gives us the data from our test folder and not from our development folder. So this version is using the file which is in that folder, which is a little bit different from this development. So if we go here, this is the dev version of our reports. It will give you the test people. And if we go to this report, this version, it will give us the test version of our data. And that's one of the key features of the deployment pipelines. It allows you to essentially use the same version of your report and segregate your data sources depending on which stage of the process you're at. So if your report is in the development stage, it will use the development data set. And if you're in the test stage, then for example, it will use the test version of your data set. And if you're in the production, it will use the production dataset. So let's finish off this demo by deploying the report that we've created from test into production. So let's say the report's been tested, we're happy with it. So now it's time to move it to the production. So we will simply just deploy to our production stage. This will copy your report and datasets into our production stage here. And let's do the same thing here. So let's change the deployment settings for the dataset. We can do it either from this button here or from the dataset directly. So we can go configure rules, parameter rules, add a rule. We'll change this one to say, give me the data in the production folder. Hit save, close. We need to just deploy again once more just to sync these two up. Now refresh the dataset just to make sure that we're using the production data. And that should be it. So if we open this report now, you'll see that it's now the exact same report, except that it's using the dataset for our production in our production folder. So it's the real users with its real IDs and the real salary, which is exactly how we intended it to. And that's really it for this video. I hope you now know how easy it is to start utilizing deployment pipelines in your Power BI service. Thanks for watching. As usual, give this video a like if you found it useful. Give it a dislike if you didn't, so I know to do better for next time. Ask your questions in the comment section box below so I can help you and you can help others. If you really like this video, we have a Patreon page where you can support the channel and get exclusive perks like early access, demo files, and credits at the end of these videos. Thanks again for watching and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.